All right, my name is Marco Palacios. In case you don't know me, my name is Marco Palacios, and I run the Pacific Hackers Meetup, and I also run, obviously, I'm the president and co-founder of Pacific Hackers Association. So before we start, we have a no asshole rule here. Leave your egos outside. So we're a community, we're a family, and that's what we're trying to make. So please, again, respect everyone here, and also be mindful that there's people around you, and there's freedom of speech, but just be respectful. Okay. If you don't know who we are, Pacific Hackers Association, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're in a mission to fix some of the issues in the cybersecurity field. Diversity, number one. We want more women. We want more people of color in this field. So that's what we're trying to do. We're fixing the education system by providing, events like this one where people can come and learn, the real stuff. Because now there's many universities offering these type of programs, but honestly, when the students graduate, they're not ready to go into the workforce. So that's the reason why they come here. And the HR system, we're still seeing, people or companies trying to hire junior analysts requesting for a CISSP. And in order to get a CISSP, you need 5 years of experience. So nothing makes sense, right? So, I always like to tell my story. Before I was part of Pacific Hackers, I was just a regular member. How I got the job where I am today, or the company that I work for, is because my boss was in front of the audience and I was giving a presentation, and that was my interview. So that's what I want for everybody. Give the opportunity to everybody to have the same experience I had. Okay. So the meetup, we've been running the meetup for 8 years now, and we're growing. We started with one Saturday a month, every month, and now in the last 6 months, we've been having multiple meetups, sometimes in different Saturdays, sometimes even during the week. This past weekend, we have an awesome event where we the presenters show how to become anonymous and leave your online traces, outside. So again, and we constantly have an event. So the next one is going to be next Wednesday or next Tuesday, and it's going to be a workshop. So we love workshops because people like to learn, and hands-on stuff. Okay, and if you want to share your knowledge, again, we're always looking for speakers. Okay, we also do a lot of collaborations. Just today, we have the collaboration with OWASP. We also do it with WISIS. And now it looks like 2025 is going to be even easier. There's other organizations that are contacting us to join meetups. And I'm very excited and happy about it. And, the conference. This year is going to be our 5th year anniversary, November 2nd. November 2nd, if you don't know what it is, it's a Mexican holiday, but it's also celebrated heavily in California. So I call it Dia de los Hackers, right? To me, it's a day to remember all the people who already passed, but leave a trace in this world, okay? But most importantly, to show that once we leave this world, everybody looks the same, Dan Kaminsky, that's what we named that room. He was a Hacker Dojo member. And if you know who Dan Kaminsky is, he's an Internet Hall of Fame. He's gonna be remembered that day. We'll have awesome presentations. We'll have 2 tracks, 5 workshops. Rashan is going to be one of the workshops speakers. And we also, for the first time, we're going to do a kids village, because we understand especially we want to integrate women into the industry, right? The number one concern is, where am I going to leave my kid? So instead of giving them tips like, well, you can, hire a nanny for a day, or, take them to this place or something, I said, well, we're building the next generation of hackers. So here you go. We're going to have a place for the kids. So yeah. And again, we're still, until Friday, we still have hope for sponsorship. Google, Akamai, and others are already joining us in supporting us. So if you want to be next to those big names, I'm just saying. And once more time, I always like to thank Hacker Dojo. Hacker Dojo has always been our home for the conference, and since 2022 for the meetups. And we couldn't do it without them. They're also a 501c3 nonprofit. So again, they're, as you can see, there's donation QR codes. So if you have, spare money, please help them to, because otherwise we will not be able to have these events here. And as always, I want to thank my sponsors. They're awesome, and I cannot do it without them. Okay. And again, we always need your help, and it's not about money. It's about spreading the word. Tell them who we are, what we do. Referrals. If you know someone who's looking for a job or just trying to get into the field, let them know who we are and what we do, right? If you're hiring, let us know that you're hiring so we can send you those people. We already placed many people just this year that have been unemployed for 2 years. So we're making progress, but it's just one day at a time. Sharing your knowledge, let us know that, you want to share something and we have a place for you. And again, if your company would like to sponsor, we're here, thank you. And our community, we have a Discord community. We're always posting jobs. We're always helping people there. So again, join the Discord if you can. And lastly, if you want to get a hold of me, email, LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and on Discord you can find me as Mark Grab. And with that, I just want to thank Prashant and OWASP for inviting us one more time to do these awesome joint events. I think this is how we bring community together, and that. So thank you so much. And I'll pass it on to Prashant.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Prashant. I am part of the OWASP Media chapter. First of all, thank you very much, Backslash, for sponsoring this event. So all these events we cannot do without generous sponsorship from companies like yours. We are always looking for sponsors, speakers, and a place to host. So if your company is willing to sponsor an event, or if you have some good speakers in mind, please let us know. We will be happy to support. Lastly, this is a community-driven event, so please don't make anybody uncomfortable. So if anybody is making you uncomfortable, please let us know, me and Marco or the host here. We will try to speak to that person. So without much ado, we'll get started with our event. Panel discussion for now. You have that? Yeah. All right. We'll start.
So now we're going to have the first panel, or you want to choose the speakers, or how do you want to do it? All right, let's do it, guys. You can do it.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking time from your busy Wednesday evening and be here with us. Is the pizza good? Yes? Wonderful. Well, today we are going to talk about something really awesome. This topic is very near and dear to my heart. My name is Trupti and I'm Director of Product Security at DocuSign. And it's been almost 18 years I'm doing software security. And during those 18 years, I have seen myself torn between compliance-driven application security and innovation, real-world risk-driven application security. So that's what we are going to talk about. And our expert panelists are Kunal. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Kunal Bhattacharya. I worked in multiple different companies, mostly product security, application security. And prior to moving to security, I've donned a bunch of hats. Been a developer, sysadmin, DBA. So just trying out security.
Kunal, when you don't do security, what do you do?
I run. I'm a runner.
Excellent. We need those endorphins to manage the reactive stresses of cybersecurity, right? Prashant.
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Prashant. I work for an e-commerce company. I manage the product security there, and I'm part of the OWASP Media chapter. And I've been involved in information security for past 20 years now.
He's underselling himself. He's such an awesome community builder. He joined OWASP Silicon Valley chapter 6 years back, and since then he has grown the number of member size to 6,000. So let's have a big round of applause for Prashant. Prashant, what do you do when you don't do security?
I try to work out, and I love traveling.
Excellent. And then our last panelist, but not least, Sarah. She's my wonderful, wonderful co-worker at DocuSign. She's Senior Manager of Vulnerability Management. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
As Trupti mentioned, I work with Trupti at DocuSign. I lead vulnerability management. My space and my focus for the last probably 5 or 6 years has been more so infrastructure vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, emergent vulnerability response, as well as sustainability issues and topics as it relates to people and processes. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. When you don't do security, what do you do?
Ooh, I also travel, so I'm actually going to Mexico City soon.
Lovely. How amazing. Since you have the mic in your hand, I'm going to ask you this very fundamental question. While managing gazillion priorities as product security professional, have you ever seen yourself torn between the compliance need and then the real world risk needs?
Absolutely. I think that is like a very common and valid experience that a lot of people, probably everybody in this room, has experienced. And I've seen it occur in 2 main ways for me. I would say the first one would be having to prioritize maybe like lower impact or lower value work because of some prescription that is coming down from compliance. And for example, one such experience I've had has been with FedRAMP and FedRAMP related compliance requirements. So having to utilize prioritization models that I perceive as potentially older or keeping us back from sort of next generation prioritization. They utilize CVSS3 as their primary risk ranking. And you must, take CVSS3 lower risk issues and fix those within their prescriptive timelines. Another way that I've been definitely torn has been around tool rationalization and tool vendor options. So this happens quite often, and it's not necessarily specific to compliance either. There's obviously going to be a ton of different requirements, whether that's architectural or budgetary or legal, et cetera, that you're going to have to deal with. But within the compliance space, I've definitely seen, okay, we see this awesome tool within security tool, and it's certainly OP. And unfortunately, when I'm digging into, can I operationalize this at my own company? And I look at the compliance requirements, they're like, oh, unfortunately, you won't be able to use that tool. But you can use this much less effective tool for, unfortunately and coincidentally, more money. So that's definitely a situation that I've had.
Thank you, Sarah. Please raise your hands if you have found yourself in similar situation. Just for the sake of FedRAMP compliance concerns, you have to only purchase, thank you, tool from some certified marketplace. And then we can't look at those cutting edge, innovative, brand new, startups in security space because they are not certified. Yeah, too sad. Prashant, what has been your experience? Do you also find yourself being torn between the compliance-driven world and the AppSec world?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, large part of product security relationship with compliance is largely driven around providing the evidences. And invariably, during any audit or any verifications that evidences we have to provide, there will be some high or critical vulnerability that will pop up, and then we have to either mitigate that issue or provide a justification. So, and the time frame will be pretty less. So, eventually, say, those are some of the stressful times that whenever we are going through an audit, some vulnerability like Log4j will pop up, and then we are working to solve that issue.
Oh my God, who remembers here the Log4j? Everyone. Kunal, you being security executive at Sentinel-1 earlier this year, you have seen the both vendor side as well as compliance side. So tell us a little bit more about your experience. Is compliance a sales function or is it security function? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question, Trupti. I think from my perspective, both in cybersecurity companies as well as fintech or any of the other non-vendor companies. And I've seen both sides of the coin. And when I'm working for a cybersecurity company, I see security being like a selling point. I've seen also realized that CISO or deputy CISO, for example, one of them is actually involved in doing sales if you're working for a vendor company. So if you're selling your product and if it's not secure, then it's a little hard to sell that product, right? But coming from the other side, if you're working for a fintech or any other industry for whom you're using a cybersecurity vendor, you would like to know what it is that the security product provides, first of all, and what are the processes that they do. For example, what is the third-party risk assessment? What is how are they handling the data? Things like that. So I think it's a mixture of both. It's both compliance-driven as well as you need to do stuff because I think Marcos has put out the thing, right, where he talked about, or I think there was a board there I saw, trust, do not trust, trust but verify. I actually take it one step ahead and say do not trust and verify.
Excellent. Do you actually think compliance is equal to security?
Compliance is what is bare minimum that is needed. So everything real securities have to be built on top of it.
Okay, excellent. Sarah, what are some of your views? Is compliance a sales function or it can be security as well?
Yeah, my brain goes down the rabbit hole of is everything a sales function in and of itself? But in general, I think compliance fundamentally is just about a means to measure the reality of your organization's output and operations against some predetermined standard or policy. So with that, I don't necessarily think it's either. I don't think it's security for sure or sales in its basis. However, in, I guess, more modern day organizations, if I think about what information is used to drive the creation of compliance controls, it tends to be whatever is necessary in order to operate businesses within a certain industry or a particular geographic area. So I do, in that sense, sort of feel swayed to say it is more of a sales function.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm commonly asking myself, would this specific control exist within our policy if there were no regulatory restrictions around this? Simple.
Yeah, okay. So Prashant, I would like to ask you, is it possible to find some middle solution between compliance and security needs? Can you tell us a little bit about compliance engineering?
Yeah, actually, a large part of security is driven through compliance. I mean, if there are no compliance, like say FedRAMP or like say PCI, many of the organizations probably might not think about security unless they get hacked. So also in our organization, we use compliance as a tool to sell security. Basically, we say that, okay, if you don't do this, we will fail PCI compliance. So please patch some vulnerability like that. And large part of that now is driven through the tools. Like say we have different kind of tools which are available for evidence collection. I've seen tools like Compliance Cow, Vanta. Using them, you can do a much more faster evidence collection and submission to the auditors.
So, Prashant, I was really wondering when product security engineers use compliance as a means to drive fear-based decision, like this is needed by compliance, so do it. But in my 18 years of experience, I have seen that all the companies who are compliant, and they literally have 50 compliances and 50 people compliance team, they get hacked all the time. So for me, compliance is not security. What are your views on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can be compliant, but you can be insecure. A large part of say the e-commerce application getting hacked, but they have been compliant with PCI compliance. Also, a lot of these compliance have not caught up with the hacker mindset. A lot of hackers come up with the innovative approach to hack stuff, but then the compliance does not think about many of these kind of scenarios.
Okay. What about you, Kunal? How can we bridge the gap, and what does compliance engineering mean to you?
I think there's a lot of fancy terms that we use these days. To me, compliance engineering is more about automating stuff. There's a panel discussion last week where they talked about the future of SOAR. And basically, it's automation. And I'll give you an example, right? Back in the day, we used a tool called Archer. It's a GRC tool. And every time the GRC team used to come to us and say that, hey, can you guys provide evidence of running a SAS scan or DAS scan? And we had to take a scan and then provide it and then in some format. And then they used to upload it to Archer. And I used to, basically bang my head against the wall because this is not how things need to be done. Fast forward to 2024, there are a lot of vendor companies. I think Prashant mentioned a couple of them. They actually they are mapped to multiple different compliance frameworks. Like you may have the NIST, which is a overarching thing, and then you have the subset, for example. So the idea here is basically you have a set of controls which are possibly repeated in multiple different frameworks. And a lot of times the compliance team, we are already NIST compliant, but we need to go to GDPR. And there's a possibility that a few of the controls are actually matching. So would you go ahead and again test those things? No, you would actually use some of the new age tools where they have the overarching framework and you'd say, hey, this is the one control which is missing, or one is probably too less, but 2-3 controls that are missing. And if you do this, then you can go from this compliance framework and add this other one, which will again help sell it. So all this together is what I feel has made the evolution of GRC a little bit and kind of brought compliance engineering or GRC into compliance engineering.
So folks, let's say compliance engineering will take care of the evidence collection in automated fashion so that product security engineers can actually do their real job. Can we agree on that?
It depends on what you say is the real job, right? But yes, the idea, I think Prashant alluded to it first about catching up to the hacker mindset. I think what's lacking is the government agencies. They are the ones who set the rules for these compliance frameworks. Now, there's always bureaucracy involved, whichever country you're in. And by the time a framework evolved and is out to public and published, the hackers are already, thinking about the next big thing. So it has to be a different approach has to be taken to be able to catch up to the hacker mindset, even from the government perspective. So if you are able to do that, that is what I feel the product security professional should be able to bring to the table. Excellent.
So Prashant, in less than a minute, please tell us some of the examples from your work experience, how you have been able to prioritize innovation-driven application security work and did not have to worry about compliance. Do you have any examples?
I can say that we were recently working on content security policy. We thought that it's a pretty good thing to have it on website. 2 years after we started that project, PCI compliance came up with the regulation saying that for the new controls, we need to have CSP in place. Okay. So in that, what we were trying to innovate was later decided by the compliance to enforce that.
Excellent. Maybe the compliance folks need to join high-tech organizations, right? All right, Sarah, do you have any examples where, your team has done some sort of innovation where you guys don't have to worry about compliance requirements, but, you can focus more on bringing the actual risk down?
Yeah. In terms of things that my team has done, has been sort of twofold. There has been a ton of different automation that we've worked on that delivers exactly what kind of report is necessary specifically for our different audit and compliance teams. So strip down reports that, amalgamate different data sets from different environments. So that is very common for us to focus on. And then there has been a lot of also, I think, knowledge sharing as well of hey, you could, implement easy automations like this as well. So empowering them to be able to define what their needs are and then helping guide them in building automation if they have that skill set or are, trainable in that way.
Yeah. Excellent.
Oh, and I would say also one thing that we're still sort of on a journey of is, and I don't necessarily think maybe my team is the one to take this on, but policy as code is also a big thing that could help drive the reduction of a lot of cross work between compliance teams and security teams.
Tell us a little bit more about infrastructure as code.
Yeah, so in terms of being able to define out what specific configurations are necessary, they're going to come to you with hey, I need X thing, S3 buckets to be hearted in these ways. Here are our controls. And being able to utilize code to define those patterns and either enforce that at build so that those deployments already are hardened exactly as they need to be, or for example, container images as well, just utilizing hardened images straight up, are excellent ways to just avoid a lot of the reporting madness that comes with and continuous monitoring that comes with cloud environments.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Sarah. Kunal, please give us examples of some innovative AppSec approaches where you did not have to worry about compliance needs.
When we talk about AppSec, I always say shift left. And a lot of companies that I've joined and been asked to bootstrap the program, there's something in place, some scanners that are running. Most of these places that I've been at, they do not have threat model. So I'm not saying that's innovative, but that's something that you want to start with, especially if you say it's shift left. Now, going back to the innovation part, there was a Ponemon Institute study that was done, I think in 2013. The cost of finding vulnerabilities and fixing it, it goes up exponentially. That's why you want to find design issues earlier. One of the things that we were able to do at one of my organizations that I worked in was basically threat model as code. Nowadays, I know a lot of companies are doing that, but there is an open source framework, and there are probably many more. The one we used was Python based. And the idea was that in an ideal world, the developers will come to you and say that, hey, we have this great idea of this product which is going to change the world. And why don't you threat model? That never happens in reality. So what ends up happening is there is at least some amount of code that's been written which you come to know of, and you are mostly reacting. So if you are able to embed the threat model into the pipeline, you have some amount of bells flashing, if that's the way to put it, to say that, hey, this is something that is coming down, and these are the threats that have been at a high level that have been, and these are the recommendations that are there. Over time, of course, you can build the library of threats depending upon the organization and all of that. But that's kind of one of the innovation, and I think a lot of companies are exploring that further.
Yeah, I love it. Well, with this, I want to open the floor for questions from audience. We have plenty of time, so guys, don't be shy. Just stand up or sit down and ask your questions. Yes.
First question, I have two questions. First is Kunal, like you talked about threat model. That's really nice, but in agile world, doing a threat model for every feature really becomes difficult. And how do you scale this? How do you scale threat modeling?
Well, that's the whole reason why we wanted to do a threat model as code. There's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen for sure, but again, depends upon what industry. The company that I was trying to do this was insurance company, and the threat landscape is different there compared to like a cybersecurity company, right? And when you're using any of the open source tools, you have a set of open threats that are there, which is very generic. So what you need to do is basically build that threat level and customize it for your industry. And once you do that, you add it to the pipeline, at least at a high level. It's not much different than you tweaking, let's say, a sneak, right? But it has to be built over them.
So in order to scale threat models, templates that will contain common threats specific to that technology or industry domain, as well as templates that contains a lot of security controls relevant. Prashant or Sarah, do you have more to chime on scaling threat models?
Personally, I agree with everything that you said. I do also think that generally, and I feel this way about testing as well, is that we have to weigh that of like the initial investment with the long-term outcomes of what you will save from having done that. So if you invest now time and effort, you're going to potentially save X amount of time that's double or triple that whenever you find a bug that now you have to stress over fixing because it came through a bug bounty. So I definitely think you also have to weigh that as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sir, what's your second question?
Yeah, so the second question was regarding what Prashant made, that how they implemented
Content
CSP.
security policy.
Yeah, and then that became a requirement, right?
Yeah.
So in your experience, has there been a situation or have you come across a situation where you met the compliance, but it was not secure?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I was working for a bank and I was managing a application which was giving reports with SSN number. The compliance basically said that any reports with SSN numbers more than 5,000 should not be allowed. Okay, so engineering team told that let's be innovative, let's restrict the number of SSN number to 4999. So we were compliant, but then the reports had plain text SSN number, so we were not secure. So there are examples like where you can be compliant, but yes, you can always bypass security.
I almost think that being compliant is like doing a lawyer's job where we have to provide enough paper chase, right? Paper trail. And being a product security engineer is like cop. We have to stop the crime and recover faster from the crime. So two different profiles.
Sorry?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Can you name the threat modeling tool that you extended?
Say that again?
Do you use an open source threat?
Oh,
modeling?
PyTM.
IT.
PyTM. It's a Python based.
And would you say it was easily extensible? You didn't have problems extending it?
It had to be catered to the insurance sector, which is not very forward moving, to be honest. But I think in the tech sector, it's definitely more expensive.
Do you have any features that you want? I'm in a somewhat unique position to rewrite one of the threat modeling.
What I have seen as threat model is very, very powerful when done by a diverse set of people. Having automation helps match the developer velocity and productivity. But oftentimes, security engineering teams with their respective counterparts, they only focus on enumerating the threats and identifying the controls. What they don't do afterwards is they don't necessarily do hands-on security testing or code review immediately to validate the effectiveness of those security controls. So somehow, if we can add those workflow right after threat model, that will be super powerful. Like, don't just trust the developer or architect. Like, we have this WAF here, that means we are good. Go actually look at the WAF's configuration or the CSP configuration.
And you run the threat modeling in like a pipeline every time? Like how do you continuously validate?
So the idea that we went with was you have a minimal set of pipelines that I think we were using GitLab at the time. And we worked with the DevOps team to make sure that any code that goes in, it goes through the first check was the threat modeling and then the SAST and all of that. So anytime a new repo is created, it will go through that basic set of tests of threat model templates that we had. And then you will get an idea of what it is. I'm not saying it is the best, like Tripti said, right? It's not, you won't find those like big ticket items probably, but at least you'll be able to scale. And then you can actually leverage your human resources to do a much deeper threat model, using the human brain and maybe AI, I don't know. We didn't talk about AI.
What was that? Everybody's awake? Yeah, we did not threat model that. Good one, Vishal. We need those nerdy security jokes. Hello, 1, 2.
Oh, without that, without
Without
that.
All right.
I guess just a last follow-up. How often is the threat model updated once you redo it?
The idea is basically the rule that I had set in a couple of companies that we put in, and this can be very subjective. But if there is more than 30% of code change, then you want to do a threat model again. But there's no math here.
So I wonder, Kunal, if we are doing threat modeling after code is written and repos are created, isn't that late
No.
for classic threat modeling?
That's what I said earlier. The ideal situation is you want to threat model before a single line of code is written. But in reality, that seldom happens. Right? That's where the threat model in the pipeline helps you find those issues when you know that it's going to come. So it's being prepared. Hello.
So I guess we have to differentiate between threat model of a newer feature that we are continuously building versus threat model of a brand new service or product that is yet to come, and accordingly check our strategy. Any other question? Yes, Munafar.
Yeah, so the biggest threat that comes is from open source software that you're consuming and you're building on top of that. Is there a specific policy that you have when you are ingesting a new open source artifact? Is there any specific policy that you follow or for it?
Great question. Open source is the biggest threat and risk. Prashant, do you want to take that?
Yeah, basically, I mean, a lot of people put some checks on the pipeline, basically PR request. If the PR request has any critical or high vulnerability, we can block that. That's a bare minimum I think we can do for unknown or like said components as we.
Yeah, and what I have seen is it's hard to stay on top of the beast of open source security vulnerability, right? Because we empower our developers, give them freedom to use whatever they want, and we don't like to block them just because there is CVE or vulnerability. So mostly what I say, yes, we have all sort of open security scanner and Dependabot and Renovate bot that can help them to stay on top of latest greatest. But I like to have culture of security by training my developers. Just get into the habit of upgrading your open source component to the latest stable version with every release. If it's a high impact component, then maybe every major release. But if it's like Ruby packages or JavaScript packages, just keep on upgrading every minor release as well. Don't wait for security vulnerability to show up. Next question. Yes.
Oh, my question is for Sarah. And I think you mentioned something about like policy as code, right? Like how do you generally integrate with your pipelines or how do you do that?
Yeah. I was looking for the mic. So in general, we tend to implement policy as code through Terraform. So a lot of our infrastructure tends to be utilizing Terraform, and then we utilize ADO as well. So we tend to get a lot of marketing rules from our compliance teams, but we tend to also help define some of that with our security architecture team. So that's generally how we utilize it. I think there's so many different ways though.
Yeah. Prashant, do you have another perspective, or Kunal?
Yeah, we use in one of the companies that I work at, we use OPA. You use the policy agent and you define the policies. It takes a little bit of time to understand. It's got a language of its own. But once you get it, then you can actually, or ideally, you can translate each of your policies, including compliance policies, into OPA. And then you can go from logging into blocking. So if it's not, let's say if it's not running the SAS scan, then you can actually block it to move ahead with it.
Thank you, Kunal and Sarah. Yes.
What do you have Terraform? Do you just have the cloud resources Terraform, or do you have everything?
Oh, just cloud resources Terraform.
I'm so glad that nobody has compliance related question.
I'll throw in a compliance related question. So I'm in MedTech, and one of the challenges we have is that there's a slow loop on the approval process of code changes because of medical, FDA, safety, bureaucracy stuff. Only good thing that exists, but the general advice is to rapid deploy and rapid iterate on, for example, OSS dependencies. How do we deal with that in a scenario where we can't rapid iterate?
Great question. Anyone?
There are certain things which, if it's a life and death thing like medical, I think there are more liability issues, to be honest, which is why regulations will not permit what you're doing. But technically, this is definitely possible. Kubernetes is the thing, that most companies go for if you want to release multiple times a day. So technically there is no challenge. It's more about not getting sued and not killing people, especially in those kind of industries. So I know that's not the answer you were hoping for, but
it's that type of industry where going slow is actually going fast. This is where safety is more important than security. So unless thorough testing is done for the new patch or upgraded version of the library, I will be very apprehensive to apply that change in the production. But great question. Does anybody else in audience have better answer? From anybody from medical industry, or Munawar, maybe you are our open source security expert? Any suggestion for medical industry?
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
So, but in general, right, for compliance, I think what they try to do, if they cannot completely fix it, they try to reduce the risk by compensating control. That way you meet the compliance, but still then you work further to mitigate, but you put in some kind of control so that it is a compensating control that will meet the requirement.
Okay.
By medtech, you mean devices?
Yes, medical devices.
Well, then, JavaScript, whatever, probably is not relevant. Probably just writing a bunch of C++.
Yeah, we have time for one more question, guys. Yes, sir.
What matrix do you guys use to convert risk to cost so that I can advocate to my leadership to do more credit monitoring?
you mean like a formula for risk to cost?
Like what metric, what's the conversion there?
I mean, there is two factors here, right? One is severity of an issue, and the other is probability of occurrence. So you can do something as simple as multiply the two and come up with a risk factor, and then map it to a dollar amount. Another approach that I've taken in one of the companies is if you have a bug bounty program or you talk to HackerOne or whoever, right? They have standard for, let's say, cross-site scripting will cost $250 or something, right? So you can use that to say that, okay, you found 50 cross-site scripting in your application, so put that into dollar amount. And if you want to put brand reputation there, that's a question I don't think I can answer.
Anyone else? So, what I have seen is I have used return on security investment formula quite a bit. This is where we calculate cost of the security control, cost of deployment, or if you have to hire somebody to roll it out. So calculate that. And then simply try to look for, industry breaches or security incidents for the peers in industry or equivalent industry, and see how much losses they have to suffer. For example, because of GDPR violation, Meta has to file for 5 billion and Amazon was slammed with 888 million, right? These are pretty high numbers to motivate our executives to look into some sort of data protection or GDPR control. And you will find plenty of such examples, but try to look for ROSI, and it's pretty good. All right, with that, I hope nobody has any question. And I want to say heartfelt gratitude. Thank you, Kunal, Prashant, and Sarah for making this panel very lively. And thank you to my wonderful audience for making this panel very interactive. With that, our next speaker is Eric.
Oh, wow. Before I begin.
Oh, sorry, you want your banner?
I'm sorry?
You want your banner in that corner?
No, I don't care. It's fine wherever it is.
Okay.
Before I begin, we are going to have a raffle at the end of this event. And it's some sort of Star Wars Lego thing. Okay. And I will tell you how the raffle is going to work, because this is the most exciting part of the evening. This has a QR code where you can register for the raffle, and then we will make a selection using the assistance of an app. is at the end of the event. As a backup, if I have had problems with this app, please also put your name on one of these and throw it in the box. Don't worry, you don't have to like rush to put it in the box, you know, while I'm talking. There will be time for you to put it in there at the end of the event. So just the QR code is on this on these cards, and just write your name on it and throw your name in the box. That is if you want a nice Lego toy. So let me now grab my make sure I'm recording. Am I recording? Yes.
You want to be recorded?
No, I'm recording myself. That's fine.
Okay.
Can you move that box out of that way? There. Thank you. Okay. Play from start. Okay. There we go. There we go. So, for those of you who cannot read, my name is Eric Gold, and I'm from Security. I have listed my pedigree on this slide, which just says that I'm older than I look. And I've been around for a while, most recently before joining which is an AppSec company. You guys don't need the mic to hear me, right? My voice is loud enough. Before joining I was the first, forgive me for saying this, the first salesperson at Aqua Security and the first salesperson at Orca Security as well, along with many other startups that I've been at in my career, which spans more time than I want to say that I've been working. Today, what I'm going to talk about is the past, present, and future of application security. And when we talk about application security, the definition is that it's the code, okay? And people often differentiate between the code that you write yourself and the code that you get from other places, third-party code, which is also called open source software. But collectively, that's your application, right? So it's application security. That's what we're going to talk about. How many people in the room here are actual practitioners who are using application security tools in their jobs? Okay. And of the remainder, how many people are seeking positions where they're going to be using application security? Okay. And the rest are people in other areas of security besides application security, or tangential, or just slightly overlapping application security, I assume. Okay, great. I always like to tell the end of the story before I tell a story, and then I tell the end of the story a second time at the end of the story. So the end of the story is this. The application security world is moving beyond what I refer to as two-dimensional SAST SCA scanning. Now, for those of you who are not practitioners, SAST is just a code word for the code that you write. SCA is a code word for the third-party code that you're getting from open source packages, but collectively, it's your application, right? So I'll explain what I mean by two-dimensional in a few slides, but we're moving beyond the sort of old way of doing things, and we're moving towards a new world which is making use of this crazy technology that seems to be creeping into every aspect of our lives, this generative AI technology. And it is going to redefine what we mean when we talk about application security. And I'll explain how that redefinition is going to occur in future slides. Why is it that when we see movies, the people in the movies, and this is one of my favorite movies, Minority Report, always have the coolest tools, okay, to do their jobs. But when we're doing our jobs in application security, we have these user interfaces that are just master detail relationships. You know, there's like a header and then a lot of records and then maybe a couple diagrams thrown in there. And one recurring theme that I'm going to talk about in this presentation today is, can we get some cool tools in AppSec? You know, there was a discussion earlier about compliance versus security, and I actually wanted to interject. Compliance is making sure that the guard in the prison does his rounds on a regular basis and publishing that schedule for the entire world to know. Okay, it's complete. Well, I wouldn't curse, but compliance is definitely not security. Compliance is some sort of game that's played. It's a pretend game. It's a tea party. Okay, what?
Love it.
Bad.
Yeah, a badge. Yeah, it's like what kind of security publishes the rules so that the bad guys can say, oh, okay, everyone's going to have this, so we won't do any of that stuff. We're going this way. I mean, it's
Protocol.
Let's say that again.
Compliance protocol.
Protocol, okay. But it's publicly known by everybody. But you know what? That's not the topic of the presentation today, but I get so irked when I have to talk to security people that are dealing with compliance, and they're not really dealing with security if they're dealing with compliance. But anyways, cool tools. In medicine, last week, there was an article in the New York Times about the cool tools that exist for medicine, where you can have virtual organs and you can do virtual surgery on those virtual organs. Wow, that's a cool tool. Model the body completely and then test it for treatments and to look for pathogens in the body. Wish I had something like that for AppSec. There was a similar article about how they had modeled the brain of a fruit fly. Did anybody see this article in the New York Times? They have completely modeled the brain of a fruit fly, and they've done it so well that they can actually test the model to get the virtual fly to do things. And the way they've done that is by creating a graph of the connections in the fruit fly's brain. And they simulated with this model that they have a situation where the fly has a droplet of sugar water, and then they've tested in the virtual model the signals traveling to, like, what should be done when the fly senses that there's sugar water. And they were able to get the model to analyze it and then go back through the graph of the brain and get the virtual fly to actually react and move its tongue to the right to lick the simulated sugar water. I'm going somewhere with this, okay? But I just want to give you some background of the cool tools that we have in other industries. Why can't we have tools like this? Why do we always have to go back to these master detail relationships and the GUI reports, et cetera? Well, goes back to humans are very sluggish at changing their views of the world. And there was a long time when people thought the world was flat, And actually, if you go far enough back, people realized it wasn't flat, but then they sort of lost that knowledge and people and the flatness of the world became accepted theory. And in fact, even today, you have people that still think that the world is flat. Maybe they're saying it for entertainment purposes or to be funny, or there's this flat Earth society. I know this is a safe place here. If you're a member of the Flat Earth Society, I'm not saying anything derogatory about it. Okay, you are welcome. Okay, it's safe. But there's people who still believe that the world is flat. Well, when we talk about how applications are scanned to look for vulnerabilities, it's almost like our own little flat Earth society where we're looking for patterns in these applications, because where does this scanning come from? It comes from the late 80s, early 90s, when there was like Norton antivirus that would scan files. Well, guess what? We've been doing that for 30 years now. Okay, gradually people are starting to move beyond it, but when you have microservice architectures where an application is distributed all over the place and it's replicated, you can't pretend that it's a monolithic application. But there's a collection of practitioners and vendors who have formed their own sort of flat scanner society, where they say, oh, we gotta scan it, for compliance purposes, we must have a scanner, okay? And we must scan through our monolithic code. The defenders have their schedules and checklists of the guard duty, when the guards are gonna be going through, et cetera, and they're making sure that they're getting things done. The attackers are not thinking in terms of lists and schedules. The attackers are like, let's get creative. How can we get into this application? How can we get something in there, have it rest for 6 months, and then do something else, and then do this? So the attackers are much more sophisticated than the defenders. Why can't we switch that? And why can't we, as defenders, start to get a little bit more sophisticated and frankly, I think one of the reasons is the tools that we're using that are stuck in the 90s, doing this flat scanning and treating application code as if it's monolithic. The attackers study how to exploit, and the defenders kick up dust and look busy. Okay, but they're not thinking creatively about how to protect the applications. Why is this? Well, with flat scanning, there are two dimensions. There's code, and then there's patterns of vulnerabilities that you can find in that code. So it's sort of like a black and white world where you find these vulnerabilities or risks in the code, but you don't really, it's two-dimensional. You don't have a third dimension. What is that third dimension that we're missing? It's the graph. It's understanding the interconnectedness the way that an attacker understands the interconnectedness, adding color to the diagrams so you can see what the actual paths are. And when you do that, this intersection of vulnerabilities, code, and paths to create these meaningful graphs allow you to have insights that 2D flat scanners can't give you. And that is where the startups like Backslash of the world today are innovating, is this sort of graph-oriented approach towards understanding the code, because you can't just look at lines of code and look for patterns, because it's like looking at an individual tree but not seeing the whole forest around you. It's a very applicable metaphor for the situation. It's also similar in airport security, where we got to treat everyone equally. Okay, even grandma with her cane, we're going to check her the same way that we're going to check someone who looks like they're going to kill someone, however you define it. Okay, because we have to treat everyone equally. That's what we're doing with applications. We're treating every line of code equally because we don't know our applications. And the newer tools are starting by using graphs to model the applications. They're starting to assist the security practitioners in knowing the application, even though they're not the engineers who wrote the application. Yeah, you can shift left, but developers are only going to do so much for security. They're going to do what you tell them to do, but you're still going to need security practitioners who are sort of the overseers to make sure that security is checked adequately in the applications. Now, in other industries, and specifically when I think about medical, they're using computers in a completely different way than we are using in application security. There's this whole theory of bioinformatics, okay, where the Human Genome Project, the modeling of DNA of different species, even beyond humans, and understanding how these work, and very sophisticated tools like MRIs and CAT scans, moving way beyond flat X-rays, where they can actually rotate using an MRI. The medical industry long ago realized that that there are overlapping models that are connected, and these are different graphs. And if you have the MRI along with other information that you have from other tests, you can create this I'd say three-dimensional, but it's actually multi-dimensional model of risk within the human body. Why can't we do stuff like this in application security? Imagine if we could have advanced visualizations like there is in the medical profession. Imagine if instead of doing remediation and then rescanning, we could actually have a model of the application that would automatically test the application of a patch to the model without us needing to actually do the patching. Like, you don't need to do the surgery in order to figure out how to do the surgery. You want to be able to model it somehow using these clever medical devices that exist that doctors use to practice. And I've listed a few other ones. Prioritization based upon business impact by taking a model of the application and overlaying it on top of a model of the business or what we can derive from the application about the business, differentiating between authenticated flows and unauthenticated flows. None of these will show up in an RFI for an AppSec tool, okay? But this is it's having the defenders think like attackers, okay, and use the sophistication of modeling that attackers would use. So if we wanted to build such a tool, what would we need? Well, first of all, we would need a way to name this practice. And I, Eric Gold, came up with my own name. I'm calling it cyber informatics, okay? Just like there's bioinformatics, there's cyber informatics, okay? And we're going to model the application correctly on our way to having better security. The first step, we need a language parser so that we can read through the code and understand what it's doing. Then we need a way to model the actual verbs and nouns in the code into some sort of tree structure. And actually, there's multiple trees that we're going to need. We're going to need a syntax tree. We're going to need some sort of control flow graph so that we can understand what calls what and what the sequence is and what things happen in parallel. We need to know where the data is coming from and where it's going to. And we need all those models to be combined together using, again, my term, Eric Gold invented this term, a cyber informatics compiler. Think about it this way, a compiler that doesn't produce an executable, a compiler that produces a unified model of the application for security purposes that matches in the same way that surgeons are simulating the brain surgery on the earlier slide. If we have a model of the application in multiple dimensions, then we can plan our remediation steps. We can look for pathogens within the applications using this model. And the critical two pieces that are missing from this diagram, I'm going to add them right now, are first of all, an AppSec knowledge base, best practices, rules of things to look for, common patterns, etc. The collective knowledge of our industry. This is much more than lists of CVEs and vulnerabilities. This is beyond that. This is everything we can think of about risk and vulnerabilities in applications combined with our knowledge of best practices, and then using generative AI, specifically large language models, to parse through the tree of information that we've created using these techniques on the bottom and integrate that with the knowledge base to produce what I call extended AppSec findings. In other words, not just the vulnerabilities that are in open source software packages, and not just the bad coding that introduces risk into the custom code that you're writing, but actually connecting all the dots and saying, with all the knowledge we have, here's a real risk in this application. And it might be something that's no one's considered before. This is the direction that companies, that new startups are going in right now, to move beyond that sort of 2D world. Cyber informatics compiler, okay? Cool stuff. Actually, I get excited by it. So if you have a cyber informatics compiler, you can do all the old boring stuff that the people have been doing with SNCC and check marks and Veracode. And you can present it in whatever format you want for, some people are concerned with SCA, open source software risk, and some people are concerned with SAS, which is the application code risks. And you give them all the statistics so that they can get a side-by-side comparison with the legacy two-dimensional tools, but move beyond that to other types of risk as well. And what are those other types of risks that we might be able to do with a tool like this? Well, first of all, if we have a correctly modeled application, we can start to differentiate between the code that actually is called and the code that is never called. Because if code is never called in your application, while you might need to fix it for compliance reasons, it's a waste of time when it comes to real payback. It's just making you look busy. So, and that concept of filtering by whether or not code is actually invoked is sometimes referred to as reachability, although reachability has a different definition depending on which software company and which practitioner you talk about. So you have to be very specific when you're talking about filtering by reachability. But if you do filter by reachability, you can have amazing return on investment by saying, yeah, that you've got 9,000 vulnerabilities. It's only because there's dependencies where packages contain other packages that have vulnerabilities, but you're not using any of that stuff. There's not any point in your application code where you're actually invoking any of the vulnerabilities. It's just in the backpack that the application is carrying on its back, but it's never accessed in any way. So you can say, yeah, there's 9,000 vulnerabilities. You only need to fix 60 of them because they're reachable in some way. That is the first and most easily understood extended AppSec feature that is now starting to appear in tools that practitioners are using. But the term reachability is undervalued. And the reason it's undervalued is because people say, do you have reachability? Because we need reachability. No, you don't need reachability. What you need is an app graph. Okay. You heard it here, another term that I created. The CEO of my company keeps saying, you keep creating terms, it's brilliant. I'm like, we're doing new stuff, you have to give it a name, okay? So if you have an app graph, you can start to look at other types of risks beyond the risks that people have been looking for the past 30 years. You can start to think like an attacker. So another example of how you might use this graph. Just like the surgeon could plan their surgery in advance by doing surgery on a virtual heart or a virtual brain, you have a virtual application representing your application, and you virtually apply a patch to it and see what the side effects are when you apply that patch, and you can make decisions about what version of the upgrade you want to do. Do you want to do the minor upgrade or the major upgrade? But you need to have a model first in order to do that sort of simulation. Also, if you've correctly modeled the application, you can also identify risks that people never considered before, like the risk of a phantom package. Sometimes they're called ghost packages. It is where someone references usually third-party codes in their application code. They invoke third-party code, but they never officially declare in the application manifest that they're using this third-party package. It sort of becomes like a backdoor where an engineer just put it in their code without telling anybody about it. So when they go through their standard vulnerability scanning, they don't scan that package because nobody officially knows that it's there. But if you have a correct app graph, then you're going to be able to discover these sorts of phantoms. So let's do a review here of the history. Started out, when people were doing their coding in Fortran or COBOL using, anyone ever use Roscoe? No, maybe not. Okay, DCL, that's VMS, DCL? No, okay. That developers would just consider risk when coding. Then there started to be best practices, and people would say, here's the rules, manually review your code. Then you had antivirus software where you started pattern matching code, and that went for 30 years. Now we are graphing the code to identify the first concept of extended AppSec findings, which is reachability. But the really advanced stuff is where we start to join it all together to figure out the entire paths of attack that can exist. Because even if code is reachable and it has a vulnerability, there might never be any sort of activation or triggering of that vulnerability. So yeah, there's vulnerability and it's reachable, but the application has no connection to the outside world, like with a SQL injection, for example. If there's no place for an external actor to put data into a field, then no SQL can be injected, even if the vulnerability is there. So having that fourth dimension of joining together these risks into meaningful paths is also where we're going by having these application graphs that are understood. I've already talked about a lot of these concepts, making sure that there's a clear definition of reachability, and then the fact that a path needs a trigger in order for it to really be a risk. But you could say, yeah, you've got 10,000 vulnerabilities, and of those 10,000, 60 are reachable, but of those 60, only 12 can be triggered in some way. So fix those 12 first, okay? Then fix the 60, and then the other remainder of the 10,000, you don't really need to do anything about. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, wow. the human brain. So many critical application flows are in the brain. And when something bad happens in a certain area of the brain, we know what it's going to affect. It's going to affect hearing, touching, moving, etc. We don't have this knowledge of applications as security professionals. We have piles of code that we're assessing and looking for risk without there being any connection to what it's actually doing for the business. Well, if we correctly graph the application, making an application graph, then we can start to identify the critical application flows in our application. We can start to know our application. We can identify things like payment processing, data storage, core application logic, user engagement, resource management, encryption and key management, etc. And then using generative AI and giving it some guidelines of common patterns that exist in applications, we can start to see what the application is doing using a security tool that can be sort of a guided expert that's telling you, these are your critical application flows. These are all of the files in each one of the categories. No tool can do this yet, but there are companies that are working on stuff like this so that you don't have to do it yourself. It brings together the knowledge that engineers have with the knowledge that security practitioners have, so that you can prioritize based on the importance of the logic to the business. Like you can say, we got to make sure if we touch the payments and transaction handling and fix it in any way, that we double check it 2 or 3 times, because that's critical for the business, for instance. This is what we're talking about when we talk about extended AppSec findings. The more knowledge you have of these critical application flows, then it lets you avoid what do you think I'm talking about here? The butterfly effect, which is that a tiny change, you're going to fix a vulnerability in one place and all of a sudden you can't process payments anymore. That's what I'm talking about. If you have an application graph, then you can do those simulations and you can understand what the risks are of fixing different parts of the code. So let's review. If we correctly gather all the information that describes the application in all its complexity, and then put that in some sort of compiler that can then slice and dice through it with knowledge of best practices and the business world as well, then you can get these results that are these modern extended AppSec findings that I'm talking about. So remember, this was the end of the story that I told at the beginning. So the end of the story is moving beyond the 2-dimensional flat scanning, and we're moving to a world that's even beyond 3-dimensional. It's multi-dimensional, where we can get extended AppSec findings. If any of you guys have any questions about this or would like to see examples of tools that can do things like this, guess what? Contact me and I could hook you up. Thank you all very much. It was a delight to present to you, and I'm certainly willing to take some questions. What do I have time? Yeah. If there's someone in the back there. Yes.
Mentioned about Gen AI and all of that. So I'm just curious, are there models and data sets which are already available for some of the things you were mentioning? Or they are still being built?
They are being built, and the people who are building them with the purposes of gaining competitive advantage over the 2-dimensional AppSec tools that are out there. So they're not going to be like open sourced. I don't think. I think you're going to see in the first phase, you're going to see innovative companies that create it create these models and apply them, and then it starts becoming a competition of, you know, the AppSec space is so overcrowded. There's like every man and his dog is an AppSec tool. But it's a way to gain competitive advantage out of that. Yes.
So back in the 80s, when we had our TSR mouse and our IDE.
Oh, that's one of my buddies. Did you have a cassette player hooked to your TRS-80? Or drive?
TSR, I skipped that.
Okay.
But we did performance tuning.
Yes.
Does your tool also say, hey, your app is really slow at OAuth, or your app is slow at
You know what? You made an assumption in there. You made an assumption that I was talking about backslash's tool. Okay. Some of the things I'm talking about are beyond even what backslash can do right now. But I will tell you this, if you have a correctly modeled application, the sky is the limit of what you can do with that model. And you will be able to do things beyond pure security. And one dilemma that companies like backslash that are creating these models are going to have to decide is how much they want to go out beyond security when they're using that application model to do other things beyond security. I think in 5 to 10 years, though, there's going to be an entire business devoted to modeling applications with the help of AI, so that we don't just treat lines of code as if they're anonymous things. We need to understand how they're participating in systems. Yes.
I'm just curious, how are you building these, like, for a concept of building these trees? Because obviously abstract syntax trees exist for compiled applications, but this is, you know, cross application, cross language, cross node.
It's like compiler design. We have to we and other companies that are doing this have to build specialized compilers with all the problems that compilers have. Like, you have to have a slightly different way of creating the abstract syntax trees for different languages, but it's compiler design.
Yeah. Okay.
Other questions? Way in the back.
You talked about level vulnerability, identifying a flow, and then the vulnerability is not exploited from the outside world.
Yeah.
But if an application is deployed internally or publicly, how do you identify that? Which is more of a deployment strategy rather than just application.
I think I was purposefully vague in some sections of the presentation, but I did talk about the concept of a trigger or some sort of activator for an attack path. The most simplistic description of that is the external world, okay? But there certainly could be other triggers. Even a completely self-contained application could have a hypothetical trigger, which would activate a attack path. But I haven't done enough imaginative thinking myself yet to think through all the examples. Probably in the next or the third revision of my presentation after this, I'll start to come up with some examples. But we're talking about really the cutting edge of how to think about how to correctly model an application for AppSec purposes. Was that a reasonable answer? It was an evasive answer, but okay. Other questions? Yes.
More of a comment. If you can do the blue slide, you can just write code.
If you can what?
You can do the blue slide. You got a blue slide, right?
Yeah.
You can just write code. You don't need developers, really.
No, I don't know. I will accept that as a valid comment. But again, companies like us, we have to decide. You're saying that the solution could produce the code without the developers?
Well, you can do the things on the blue slide with an existing code base.
Yes.
You could add features without developers because you already understand the application pretty well.
Yeah, perhaps. I was thinking more of what the security applications would be rather than the efficiencies that you could get from coding practices. But I believe that that's going to happen. But there's still going to need to be, for the time being at least, when it comes to innovation, I have not yet seen the AI doing that type of innovation.
Well, because the blue slide doesn't exist.
Yeah.
What are the,
Oh, here we go,
what
yes.
are the limitations that you're aware of currently? That you're trying to resolve?
These graphs get really complicated. And they can get big also. In order to compete in the world of AppSec, you have to be able to have a solution that's going to work for the largest companies in the world with the most complex application structures where they have thousands of microservices, you know, like an SAP scale or something like that. And so
A lot of technical debt.
yeah, you have to have usually not a lot of smart people actually, because as you all probably know, sometimes the best solutions come from a few smart people in a room, but they have to do some pretty complicated coding. But I will tell you that I know firsthand that this is what people are trying to achieve and what people are working on. I've seen the demos of things. I haven't seen production product yet, but I've seen demos of some of the more cutting edge features that I talked about. But this again, the purpose of this was not to be this is what Backslash does today presentation. It was to give you an insight into what we're thinking in our minds. You know, we're sort of at the early phases of reachability and attack paths, but we're thinking well beyond that with the flexibility and usability of the models that we're creating. Yes, in the back.
So you mentioned about reachability and some of this is coming out of ignorance. Does it cover everything with regards to SCA, SBOM and the static analysis of the whole code? Or is it more likely to work in one over the other?
That's a great question. You know, as a falsely modest sales guy, which I am, I would say that it's really complicated if you think about it as SCA here and SAS there. When I dumb it down for myself, and I'm listening to all the experts talk about SAS and SCA, I just hear blah, 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 blah. It's all code. It's just that some of the code was written by other people and some of the code was written by you. So is there really a need? The only reason we're talking about SCA and SAS is for the same reason that CRTs had 80 characters when they were first invented, because punch cards had 80 characters, okay? In 5 to 10 years, we won't be talking about SCA and SAS, okay? That's the old world. That's the old terminology. It's a legacy terminology. Does that answer your question?
Not really.
So I'm not only falsely modest, I'm evasive also. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you did a good job with that. But jokes apart, what I was getting at was that if you look at the reachability in the code written by developer itself, the nuances are different from where the open source components would come in. So if you have better GenAI models, then does that improve your likelihood? Because reachability that you have done for GenAI, like if you were to put in all the SCA information into GenAI, then your likelihood of having a better reachability understanding would be more, because you have millions of open source packages and they are likely to use in a certain way. So that's why I was trying to see if a bifurcation exists, if that makes sense.
A bifurcation definitely exists, okay, because the market of practitioners demands vendors to speak in the term of antiquated legacy tools that differentiate between SCA and SAS. What I'm saying is that, in my opinion, that is just a capitulation to people that are stuck in an old world. It's not SCA and SAS is not an accurate description of the graph of an application.
usually saying that companies have created it to kind of show capabilities, but it's not a real bifurcation is what.
Yeah, you've got an application. There's this function, there's that function, you know, some of them are open source software, some of them you wrote yourself. And it's only because the tools available have been separate that people talk about it separately. But in 5 to 10 years, we won't have to think about it as separate. Because there'll be so much sharing of patterns. And when the AI writes the code as well, if something's written by AI, or when it's written by AI, is that first party code or third party code? It's maybe okay, you say first party code, but if everyone has access to the AI to create that code, then it's sort of third party code also. Well, it's a philosophical question.
Thank you.
Can we agree on that, about that? Okay, one more question. Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of it was like, again, like theoretical, so what would you say are we at this stage of like the compilation of like results now, and like what are like the years until the milestones would appear?
Okay, I can tell you where we are. Where we are is having reachability as defined as whether or not a code can be invoked. We're at upgrade simulation. And we're beginning to be, we're at the cusp of joining together the sort of atomic identification of risk and attaching it together into an attack path. But we at Backslash, we're having to make decisions about whether, when we determine that like impact analysis of remediation for a critical business logic, that is going a little bit beyond security. That's like coding best practices and remediation best practices. So our toughest decisions are to decide what to put in the product and how far to go beyond, because the practitioners are demanding SCA and SAS scanning, okay? And we're moving beyond that, but we have to sort of gently carry everyone with us so that they think outside of the box, so that people start to think about attackers and not like employees trying to achieve an MBO of how many vulnerabilities have been fixed. So we're evangelizing and carrying people, but I'm confident that everyone's going to wake up and realize that we all have to stop pretending and do some real security using modern tools instead of just matching patterns to look at this. That was the final question. Please, before the end of the night, bring your cards up if you would like to participate in the lottery. And thank you for being an attentive audience and for all the wonderful questions. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Eric, and also for sponsoring this event. And again, for everyone, thank you for coming tonight, and we'll see you either next week on Tuesday for the next workshop, or we are going to a conference. Oh, one more time? Yeah. Oh, okay. All right, sorry, never mind. I thought there was the last one, so all right. Who's the next speaker? Yeah. Next speaker. All right. Then come over then.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you want this? It's too complicated. I don't know where the back end is. We don't do auto fix, but we make recommendations on. Yeah. Yes. I live in home. My wife is here. Yeah.
For me, basically, we having the but this is one out of many special tools which we have.
Yeah.
So we are not developing specific project. We are developing application platform.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. Hey guys. Okay. Oh yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sukesh. I'm co-founder of DomDog, and I belong to the space of front-end security. Right. So, how many of you have heard of front-end security here? All right. So there are two people out here. So there have been a lot of discussion on CSP, right? So in one sense, CSP would fall under the category of front-end security. So let me first define what front-end security is. From there, I would sort of lead the rest of the discussion, right? So when we typically look at an application development lifecycle, right? Like you have multiple different teams who are writing codes, right? So to build an application, you have a backend team who is working on the APIs, at least as of now. And for the mobile application front, you have mobile application teams, right? Developer teams. On the front end, web application front end, you have a front end team. So these are dedicated teams who are building code to build applications, right? So now when we look at application security as a whole, right? We have a dedicated mobile application security space. We have a dedicated API security space. Now there is a new baby within this space. I would call it as a front-end security, right? So I belong to that space, right? Coming to my background, I have been heavily involved into web application security research since past 15 years, of which roughly during past 12 years have been actively into tooling of it, right? So I've been involved in developing certain security testing tools. I've been into testing web application security testing tools. So that includes SAST, IAST, DAST, RASP, and SCA tool, right? So in fact, my career in security began with an SCA tool. Back then, I didn't knew it was called as SCA, right? What I authored was called as Group Snipe. All right. So Group Snipe was an open source tool which would let you scan all the Drupal modules and let you know which one has certain vulnerabilities, right? So that's my background primarily. From there, I have grown out. I have seen this problem out there on front-end security where there's certain companies trying to address this problem. This is an evolving problem because there's no tooling focused on this space. If we look at current application security tool stack, right, everything is dedicated for the backend, right? So whereas the whole front end is such a low-hanging fruit, where attackers started exploiting the space a lot more, right? So I saw an opportunity, and that's how we started DomDog, right? So coming to the point of discussion of today, right? Today's topic is payment-based security and compliance, right? So how many people out here are aware of PCI DSS? Awesome. So I see you too. So PCI DSS, let me say what exactly it is. It's payment card industry data security standard. Let's say any entity in the world, if they're touching card data, right, they got to be compliant with PCI DSS. If you are taking card data over VoIP, then there are certain specifications for that, certain requirements for that. Similarly, if you're collecting card data using an web application, right, there's certain standards, there's certain requirements you have to follow, right? So PCI DSS has the latest version out there, right? It's 4.0. The most recent would be 4.0.1, right? So starting 4.0, there are certain new requirements which came into the picture. And they are like 6.4.3 and 11.6.1, right? I'll quickly delve into what it is, right? What those requirements are. But before that, I want to step back and I want to speak about what is the challenge in hand, right? So what exactly do you guys think of front-end security is, right? What are the concerns out there on front-end? right? If anyone could answer that. Oh yeah,
Cross-site scripting really does work.
absolutely true. CSS, sorry, XSS, yeah. Anything more?
Authentication.
Okay, could you be a little more elaborative on that?
Front end being configured properly, because there might be any sniffing attack if it is in HTTP or something like that. If it is not configured.
I would differ. Okay, so it wouldn't come. So, but in terms of authentication, right? So maybe misconfigurations, like GraphQL related misconfigurations, are common on front end, right? So that's something which you find on front end itself, right? So those are the issues which you could find on that. Any more answers?
Key leakage.
Key leakage. You mean within HTML or within JavaScript, you would find some sensitive keys, right? Absolutely true. Anything more? All right. So let me step even further back, right? So let's speak about front end first. So what is front end? Front end is three aspects, right? So you have HTML, right, which structures everything. Then you have CSS, which beautifies everything. Then you have JavaScript, right? That's what gives you the functionality, right? So any interaction with which you're having on a front end is through JavaScript, right? Now, when you look at any web app or web pages out there, right? What is the amount of JavaScript does the developers write, right? So that's way too minimal compared to what is available online, right? So people use a lot of third-party libraries, right? Open source, it could be a proprietary stuff. I mean, like Google Analytics, right? I think most 98% of the web contains Google Analytics. It's for finding who is visiting your site, how many page views you have and all, right? So it gives certain data to you, but you have not written Google Analytics code. It's a third-party code which you are integrating within your web pages, right? So when you look at a web page, most of the JavaScript does not belongs to you. When I say most, more than 85% of the JavaScript does not belongs to you. It's all third-party. It could be an open source or it could be a proprietary stuff, but it's third-party primarily, right? But among these three aspects of front end, right? JavaScript has a unique behavior in as such. So for JavaScript to perform functionality, for it to do anything when you click a button, right, it should basically have an root access. So a JavaScript on a web page can have access to everything on that web page, right, within that DOM. So which means whatever you're typing on a web page, a JavaScript could listen to that, right? Whatever you're sending out of a web browser, a JavaScript could listen to that, right? So which means everything which you're trying to secure at the back end, right, is pretty much open on the front end. Now, do you have any tooling on the front end to figure out what's happening, right? Way too minimal on that. So see, how to put it? So the devs ecosystem in certain way has matured, right? So that's why we have CSP. I've heard multiple people speak about CSP, right? Content security policy. That's a web standard. It was devs, developer ecosystem who bought it in, right? It's pretty mature out there and all. But there is more than CSP out there to also protect the web pages, right? So now, do we all agree that the chances of supply chain risk on front end? Do we also agree that the current tooling which we have for application security is so focused on the back end that we might not be knowing what exactly is happening on the front end, right? So that's a precise gap. And obviously, as the compliance standards were defined and everything, right? Attackers also figured out, hey, dude, so there's this gap out there. If I try to inject a malicious JavaScript into the front end, none of the tooling stack would be able to detect it. So why not let's try and do that, right? So over past 5-6 years, there have been a lot of skimming attacks. And when I say skimming, right, what I mean is web skimming attacks, e-skimming, yeah, mage cart attacks. So did anyone heard this before? E-skimming, mage cart, e-commerce guy. And so what do you do?
I do pen testing.
Awesome. So mage cart attack is pretty much like there is a malicious JavaScript which has been injected into an checkout page, and the attackers came out as an end customer is typing out the credit card data, right? So this has been so massive in past 5-6 years that there have been around like 500 to 600 million credit cards stolen right from the web pages. And this forced the PCI Council, it's called PCI SSC, Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, to introduce the new requirements, which are 6.4.3 and 11.6.1, right? So I would like to touch base on what exactly an e-commerce attack is. It's pretty simple, right? An attacker injects a piece of malicious JavaScript, right? So this JavaScript is designed in such a way that it can capture user data, right, as they're typing it. And once the JavaScript has collected the user information, the credit card information to be more precise, right, it's going to exfiltrate it into the attacker servers. It's a just 3-step process. It's so straightforward, right? Now to mitigate that, the council has brought in these 2 requirements. Now let's look at what exactly these requirements are, right? At least in my view, these requirements are well defined. And there's certain gaps, so I'll get to the gaps part. So 6.4.3 is further divided into 3 components. It's called as script inventory, script authorization, and script integrity. Whereas 11.6.1 is about page integrity. Now, what exactly is script inventory, right? So when you have a checkout page, what the PCI council is asking for is you to maintain or either to have an understanding of what JavaScripts are loaded on the checkout page. Why? Unless you know what is being loaded, right? You don't know what you're up against, right? This is such a good practice because firstly, you would figure out what are the unnecessary JavaScripts on your checkout page, which is primarily dealing with so much of sensitive information. On the second layer, you would also figure out if there is a malicious JavaScript already present. Through this process, you'll figure out you can remove it out, right? So script inventory is about understanding what runs on your payment page. Then script authorization, it's about ensuring only trusted scripts can execute on a payment page, your checkout page. So you have a script inventory. Now you should have certain control mechanism to ensure only an authorized JavaScript could execute on a checkout page. That's what the second control is about. Now, whereas it's script integrity, script authorization could be a one layer of defense, right? Now, script integrity speaks about, hey, dude, so I know I can exist in this checkout page, right? I'm authorized and all. But what happens if I change my behavior? Would you be able to detect it, right? Unless you have a mechanism to detect the changes in a JavaScript, it's tough to know whether a JavaScript has changed its behavior and suddenly became malicious. To give you an example, how many guys have among you have heard of polyfill.js, something which happened a couple of months back, right? The impact is so massive. Unless you know polyfill, unless you're continuously monitoring the behaviors of polyfill.js, right? You wouldn't know that, okay, this so well popular, well-known open source library out there could be turned into a malicious JavaScript, right? So that's the aspect of script integrity. What the council asks you is you have to have a mechanism to ensure the behaviors of JavaScripts, which you have authorized, are as you expected them to be, right? Coming to the fourth part, which is 11.6.1, it's page integrity. Now, page integrity is it speaks about holistic checkout page, right? It talks about HTTP headers. It talks about JavaScripts as well. It talks about CSS, HTML content, images which are loading, all of it. What it says is you have to be aware of all of this, and only then you would know if something malicious is happening. Why? In past couple of years, attackers have evolved in their approach of e-commerce skimming, right? So have you guys heard of clickjacking? Right? So now what mage card attackers are doing is they're creating a fake payment form, which is right above the original payment form. And that's how they're skimming out the data. If you have a normal script integrity or script authorization part, right? So those can't figure out if a JavaScript is actually skimming out from a newly created iframe, right? So when you try to implement and secure, right? So that's where page integrity comes into the picture. It speaks about complete payment page in whole, right? Which means if there is a new form which came into the presence, right, you have to be aware. Why is there a new form? Is it required or not? All of those alerts should be generated, right? So I spoke about what council asked for, and in my lens, those 4 requirements are pretty beautifully laid out. If you have if you have implemented certain controls to meet those requirements, right, you would actually attain a good security posture for your checkout pages, right? That's again, PCI SSC has zero concern about any other page out there on the front end, right? If you have a sign up form, if you have maybe an save up address or whatever other sensitive information you're dealing with, right? PCI has no concern with it. It only speaks about the checkout page. But these problems lay everywhere around, right? Especially if you are a healthcare entity, right? HIPAA speaks about the concerns too, right? The chances of certain data leakage due to misconfigurations of the front end and all. But PCI's focus is only on the checkout page. In that perspective, there are well laid out controls out there. Now, coming to the technical options which you have to comply, right, as in to meet these new requirements. There are 3 approaches. One is remote monitoring. The other one is content security policy. Then comes JavaScript agent. So I'm sure people might have heard of CSP, right? Do you know how a remote scanning, remote monitoring engine works? Any guesses on that? JavaScript agent. All right. So let's start with remote scanning. So remote scanning is pretty straightforward technique. There is an scanner, rather a browser from a cloud instance, which would go through the complete user journey until it hits the checkout page, right? If you are into functional testing and all, if you know what Selenium is, what Puppeteer is, right? So this is pretty well-known approaches in front-end space, right? So all through this user journey, there is a special a piece of software which would get attached to the browser itself, and it would be collecting a lot of information, right? So that's how a remote monitoring system works. So on periodic basis, it would go through the complete user journey to visit the checkout page, and it would have had an baseline of what is good, which is defined. And whenever there is certain anomalies to that baseline, it would try to figure out whether, okay, this anomaly is good or bad, and it would alert accordingly. So that's how a remote monitoring system or remote scanning system works. Content security policy, I love CSP personally. So CSP is one of the mature technologies out there. How many guys over here knows RSnake? Right. So RSnake was the one who came up with the approach for CSP, right? And in fact, it came. The reason he figured out CSP was to mitigate the concerns of cross-site scripting, right? I was like, dude, cross-site scripting is such a browser native thing. Why can't a browser do anything about it, right? Is there a means for us to solve this problem through maybe a security header? So that's how he came up with the idea back in 2004. From there, I think around 2008, 2009, Mozilla Foundation finally took up the idea and everything. They built the initial implementation of CSP. It was a success. Then they pushed it as a web standard. Starting 2011 up till now, we are currently at version 3 of the standard, but it's so mature. It's every browser out there supports CSP, right? CSP, I would say, consider it as a firewall for the front end. You'll have an ability to write set of rules. It's whitelist based. You could say, hey, my website or my web page can only interact with so and so X domains, right? You could define those rules, and that's how CSP works. Now, CSP also have another capability, which is report monitoring, where you could define, you could give your endpoint, and every time there's a violation to the CSP policy, right, the browser would send alerts to this particular endpoint, right? So using CSP as well, you could meet these new requirements. Coming to JavaScript agent. So JavaScript agent is again straightforward technology. What happens is there's a piece of JavaScript. It injects into all critical JavaScript APIs within the web page, and every time these APIs are being triggered, right? It would be aware. It could figure out whether this is a good, bad behavior. It would have the capability to even block certain behaviors too, right? So that's JavaScript agent. So using JavaScript agent as well, you could comply with this. So far, what I've covered is what web skimming is, how PCI DSS new requirements are written down to address this web skimming attacks, right? Then I spoke about compliance options. Now let's dig into each and every compliance options out there, right? So when we speak about remote scanning, so the list is huge. So I would be looking at this and then speak about each and every advantage and disadvantage. But what I want to cover is what are the advantages of each approach, disadvantages of each approach, and if I were to work on or implement any of these approach, right? What are the key criteria I would be looking at? So coming to remote scanning. So biggest advantage is ease of use, right? So remote scanning, there is some remote system which would visit your website as a public user, right? As an end customer. So which means there's no need for you to specifically configure anything. There's no implementation headaches you have to deal with. So the ease of use of remote monitoring system is way too high. There's no performance impact, right? So this is a system which is completely isolated from your web page per se, right? So it's not going to impact the performance of the whole web pages. Then it gives you a cross-origin visibility. So cross-origin visibility as in when you have a web page, inside a web page, you have an iframe loaded from stripe.com, right? So Stripe is a payment gateway. So it's a checkout page. You're using an iframe from Stripe. So a remote monitoring system can have a capabilities to even dig into or try and understand what exactly is happening inside the Stripe iframe, right? So that is only possible with remote scanning. Then it has the ability to analyze HTTP headers. So 11.6.1 of PCI DSS speaks about HTTP headers, right? So a remote monitoring system can also analyze what exactly the headers the server has sent as a response. And if there are any changes to the headers, it can also alert on the same, right? Then detailed behavioral insights. Oh yeah. So detailed behavioral insights is super important for any front-end security. Why? When we speak about JavaScript, right? When we look at any web page, JavaScript is just a piece of code or else a piece of URL. The URL could be from any random domain. You can't figure out which product it is, right? So we say Google Analytics as a product, but Google Analytics internally has like n number of different domains with different JavaScript URLs, right? So a detailed behavioral insights would enable you to figure out what is the origin of a JavaScript, from where did it enter, what all actions it is doing, all of this context surrounding an event, right? These insights could give. Then comes data privacy part. As JavaScript monitoring, so as remote scanning is completely remote, it does not involve anything inline, right? There's no concerns of data privacy. And overall, it sort of gives a comprehensive monitoring aspect. But coming to the disadvantages part, right? It has limited session coverage. So it's completely impractical for a remote monitoring system to go and perform analysis in certain special use cases. Like, for example, there could be certain targeted ads. Yeah, there could be certain targeted behaviors which might be only relevant to maybe visitors from New York, right? Unless the remote monitoring system scans the website from the same geolocation, right? These behaviors wouldn't be triggered. Or unless, let's say there is a high privileged user who has certain new special features within the web app, right? Unless the test account, which is used for remote scanning, has an ability to perform the same actions, you can never figure out what's happening in that, right? So the limited session coverage is on that part. Obviously, it's a remote system, so it can't block anything, right? So even if there is something malicious happening on the website, the best it can say is, good, there's something wrong happening on your web page. Go try and fix it, right? let's say if you have the challenges with anti-automation measures, if you have a bot detection and everything, implementing a remote monitoring system would be a little tricky, right? Where you have to write it in such a way that it avoids all those bot detection mechanisms. Then the need for updates, and this is a huge pain point. I mean, like most of the product teams over here would agree, the front end, it develops too quickly, right? So even if there is a change in the ID of a input tag for the button or whatever it is, right? You have to update it in the script for the remote monitoring system to function smoothly, right? So the need for updates is higher for remote monitoring system. So if you are using a remote monitoring system, my recommendation would be always ensure there is a very comprehensive data coverage. So the system should have the capability for you to check out what exactly is even happening inside an iframe which you are loading, right? So that's the depth of data it could collect, right? So any event which you find, what is the context around it? A remote monitoring system should be capable to give you that. Now coming to the automation part, right? And remote monitoring system can't sort of automate all the changes in the UI, but it should be, it shouldn't be so complex either. At least a bare minimum of automation where it detects certain changes and it can directly adapt to them, right? Is something which you got to look out for a remote monitoring system. Otherwise, it might be really complex to manage it in a long term. Now, content security policy, higher security assurance. It's a web standard. It is super mature, which means it has a greater security assurance than any other vendor-based approach, right? CSP provides a real-time monitoring as well as a blocking capability. So there's a monitoring as well as protection capability, which a CSP gives you. The way browser handles CSP, the way it works, it has almost zero impact on performance of a web page, right? So if your product team is way too particular on the performance impact, right? CSP is the right approach for you. Then, okay, so if you're using a CSP on a monitoring mode, so how many guys over here have implemented a CSP? All right, so how many of you has implemented a monitoring mode CSP? Awesome. So CSP can be implemented in blocking mode and monitoring mode, right? So whenever you implement a CSP in monitoring mode, it can't break the functionality of the site, right? So I speak to a lot of security engineers, I speak to a lot of developers. One of the biggest fear of CSP is it breaking the functionality of the site. So you could always start with monitoring mode and it's not going to break the functionality of the site. And that's a good place to start. It's a whitelist based filtering approach. And it is debatable which approach is best, but I'm really pro in terms of a whitelist based approach where you define behaviors. What are the appropriate behaviors for the website, web application, right? It is effective against cross-origin redirects, right? So when I say cross-origin redirect, imagine there is a JavaScript which you have authorized. Now this JavaScript is calling some other JavaScript from some fourth party, right? When this request is made, there is a redirect which happens. However complex it is, before entering the web page, that whole process has to go through. The end domain has to match with the CSP policy. Only then it would be allowed, right? So that's such a great capability of CSP. It has a great coverage for the same origin iframes. If you have any iframes loaded from the same domain, you could control a lot on that front. It handles violations during page unload. So page unload is a JavaScript capability where you define the moment a user is exiting a page or maybe moving to a new tab, right? You could perform certain actions, right? So that set of actions, a CSP could monitor that part too. If there's a new JavaScript loaded at that layer, CSP can handle that too. Coming to the disadvantages of it, it's such a robust whitelist based approach, and it's going to be way too tricky for you to implement it on any heavy dynamic sites. if you have a web application with which is a SP, a single page application, right? Trying to create a CSP policy just for the checkout page is not possible, because you have to write it for the complete web application altogether. So that's a tricky problem to solve with CSP. Now, it only provides pass violation details, right? Which means whenever there's a CSP violation, the information which you get out of it, the violation report, right, is so limited. It lacks so much of context around it. It might say, hey, I have blocked so-and-so URL from loading on your web page, but you wouldn't know which line of Java, HTML or which JavaScript is responsible for loading this, right? The context surrounding an alert is way too minimal with CSP. Now, with regards to what are the key considerations while using a CSP, I would say simplify deployment. Start with what's your important page, right? So if you're looking at PCI, then it's going to be the checkout page. Just start with the checkout page, then slowly move to other pages. Or if you have, if you are a healthcare company, if you're having a prescription page where people are putting in some sensitive information, right? Maybe you could start with that specific page. Leverage CSP monitoring. So CSP reports are just a JSON. Unless you have a good monitoring system out there, right? It's really difficult for you to make sense out of these reports. So try and leverage a CSP report monitoring system that's going to help you out heavily. Implement practical policies. So what do I mean by practical policies, right? So it's not so right for you to directly jump onto a block only mode policy. I would recommend to start with monitoring mode. After certain maturity, you will figure out, okay, these certain directives of CSP monitoring mode policy could be moved to blocking mode, right? So try to implement a practical mode policy that way, where you could have multiple blocking mode policies, you could have multiple monitoring mode policies. And CSP, so browser, by the way, supports multiple CSP headers, right? So people usually only implement one single header. So you could have a monitoring only header, you could have a blocking only header, you could have multiple of this too, right? So try to leverage that. Now coming to the JavaScript agent, right? Advantages being it's real time, right? So unlike a remote monitoring system, just like CSP, JavaScript agent is completely real time. It can give you high level behavior in monitoring, which means if there is a JavaScript which is skimming user data, right, as they're typing in, right, a JavaScript agent could figure it out. So that's the benefit of JavaScript agent. Now, it can provide you detailed behavioral reporting. So compared to a CSP approach, JavaScript agent could give you a better context, right? But again, if you were to compare this context with a remote monitoring system would give even further bigger context, right? For JavaScript to give bigger context, you would be compromising on the performance of the web page. So that's why most of the JavaScript agents, vendors out there, right? They are limited to the context which they could give. Flexible filtering and JavaScript agent, if it depends on how they write it, but it has a capability to do both whitelist based approach as well as block list, right? Allow list as well as block list. So that's the benefit of JavaScript agent. It supports single page applications. So any internal routing you have, right? All of that could be observed, or you can have certain specific rules written for only certain section of an SPA. That's a good part of JavaScript agent. Disadvantages. Okay, there's a huge list here. It's a proprietary solution, right? So which means the whole tech is dependent on the vendors out there. How they're building it, how they're approaching to tackle this problem. So that's one limitation in one lens. It's only limited to the JavaScript layer, which means anything which is happening at the HTML level or else at maybe CSS level, right? JavaScript agent can't do anything about it. There's a load order dependencies. What does that mean is, so when you inject a JavaScript agent to a web page, right, you have to ensure it is at the top of the page, because only those JavaScripts which are loaded after the agent is what it could hook into. right? If it is loaded at the bottom of the page, right, it can't do anything on that page. Then limitations during page unload. So the page unload, which CSP is good with, right? So JavaScript can't do anything in that part. And that's the limitation of whole JavaScript, ECMAScript itself. Possible session interference from header monitoring, right? So technically JavaScript can't access headers by itself, right? So when I speak of headers 11.6.1 of PCI DSS speaks about monitoring the HTTP headers, right? So JavaScript can't access the headers by itself, but what it can do is it can make a fetch request to the same URL. So which means there is already an active session, and JavaScript inside this active session is trying to make another request to fetch this new session, right? So it might be a little complicated in certain scenarios. So you got to be a little careful on that part. Then performance impact. The more data you try to collect with JavaScript agent, the more performance impact it could give you. And this might not be welcoming from a product team. And data verification challenges. So most of the JavaScripts, whatever data they collect, right? So they try to embed it, encode it in whatever format they prefer to the vendors, and they set it across, which means it might be a little tricky for you to figure out what exactly is a JavaScript agent sending outside your web pages, right? Now, when I speak about key considerations on JavaScript agent, optimize the placement, place it at the top of the HTML so that you have the maximum coverage. Then always review what is the data being collected, right? Are there any certain gaps, or is it collecting some unnecessary data, right? Try to review that on periodic basis. Always keep a tab on the performance impact. Like I said, even if you, out of curiosity, if you have enabled to listen out some extra key events, right, that might impact the performance heavily. So you got to be careful on that part. Then also evaluate the alert quality, right? So if and JavaScript agent is giving you alerts, right? Web pages have so many alerts out there, right? So like we personally deal with like 5 billion violations a month and everything, right? From one e-commerce is out there. So that's how massive the violations are. So always ensure there's less noise in the alerts, as well as the alerting quality, whatever information an agent is giving, right? It is sufficient for you to take some informed decisions. It is sufficient for you to at least do an analysis of whether this is good or bad, right? So that's for the JavaScript agent. So I have spoken a lot. And I hope you guys could get some sense out of this, right? But we have a technical guide on these three approaches, all the pros and cons of it, detailed explanation of that. And we do have a battle card sort of thing between a CSP and JavaScript agent, because CSP is a web standard. It has its own benefits and everything. Now JavaScript is a proprietary stuff, but it has its own benefits too. Now, as a practitioner, right, you would have to take this informed decision where which would make more sense for our organization or my organization, right? So we have this competitive analysis of these two approaches, so that could be that could be handy, right? You could find this handbook on our website, domdog.io. Then that's pretty much, guys. So I'm Sukesh. You could reach me through my email, that is sukesh@domdog.io, or else you could find me on LinkedIn. Now I'm open for any questions. Yeah.
For the second solution, you said that there's not a lot of context for the CSP.
Yeah.
Is that something like Chromium could fix? If the Chromium engineers made a change in the browser?
Is that something Chromium could fix? I mean, technically they could, but it wouldn't be feasible for them to solve that problem, right? So,
like, it would just be a feature, right? That they would have to add.
So Chromium could add it for as a dev tool. It could add it for browsing instance, right? So where you could debug and everything. But for CSP to send an alert or a report violation with so much of context surrounding it is going to be way too heavy weight for it to do that, right? So as a web standard, it's not possible to maintain it. So the limitation comes from that aspect where as a web standard, CSP, like the Chromium can't do it.
So, but couldn't you just add like a separate CSP header saying verbose, and then Chromium would include all the contents?
Unfortunately, right now it doesn't.
But I'm saying was in the future, Google wanted to, they could add this feature.
It could, right? I mean, it knows what exactly is happening. It could, right? But at least as of now, it doesn't have that the capabilities of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect adding that feature would also be privacy concern with feeding from content.
Oh yeah, that's true. So that might lead to privacy concerns as well.
But I mean, it's not really a privacy concern because it's the person who owns the website who is sending that header. Right? They're intentionally doing that. If they don't send a verbose header, then.
So again, see, verbose is going to depend, right? What layer of verbosity you're looking at. So I'll give you a context this one. So when you typically look at a CSP violation, right, it's verbose enough in terms of figuring out which from which page this violation has came in, what exactly is the violation, what exactly was the CSP header which triggered this, right? Then with regards to certain line of code from where it has been originated, right? So that's all limited. Now the challenge would be for you to figure out how did this violation actually came into picture? When I say that, there could be a JavaScript which introduced, there's a third-party JavaScript which introduced a fourth-party JavaScript, and this fourth-party JavaScript is what is causing the violation, right? For you to have a trail of all of this requires a lot of verbosity, right? So this amount of verbosity, at least right now, even if you try to debug it in the dev tools, right, it's a really tricky problem to solve. Right. So do they have the data to solve this? Absolutely, yes. Right. But is would they be solving it? I can't answer that question.
It seems like a good thing to pitch to Google during one of their standards.
I mean, I might not, because at least that's something which we solve in a different context, in a different way. Right. So for me, if I were to pitch to Google, right, what I would like to do is if I were to make something a web standard, we are really inclined to make an JavaScript agent a web standard, because CSP solves problems till certain extent. Now, for you to have a better control on high level data, right, a JavaScript agent might be super relevant, right? If I were to get back and contribute to the web standard, right? So for me, the highest KPI would be that. Now, how and what we could do with data, right? That's it's on the ingestion part of it, right? So that's a different problem. Sorry. Any further questions? Awesome, guys. Thanks a lot.
Okay. And now for the exciting conclusion of the evening.
Thank you, Sukesh. And now we're gonna do the raffle. We're gonna make it as as entertaining as with this. So you want to shake it a little bit, and then
I think it's sufficiently randomized already.
Great.
Okay, I'm gonna open that up and I'm gonna put my hand in.
Okay, here you go.
Here we go. Oh, this one feels like a good one. Okay. Is Slava Zinovich still here? There you go.
All right, we got a winner.
Like I came in today for the purpose.
There you go.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for participating.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I think this is it for tonight. And once again, thank you for coming. And we'll see you next week. So definitely register for the next workshop and the conference. See you later. Have a good night.